world that is being used as a replacement for animal therapy in nursing homes, which is really kind of awesome.
So she built planets on Earth, you guys.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our very special event, Survival of the Friendliest. I'm James Wetzel, the producer of adult programs here at the Museum of Science, and I'm coming to you live from our brand new Suit Cabot studio. I'm thrilled to have our friends, Dr. Brian Hare and Vanessa Woods, here with us tonight. Hopefully many of you out there were able to catch our previous programs with Brian when he was in conversation with Isabella Rossellini. I'm so thrilled to have him back tonight with the wonderful Vanessa Woods. They're here to talk all about their brand new book, Survival of the Friendliest, which was released over the summer. It's an amazing read and a fascinating new theory that you're going to hear all about tonight, but it's also incredibly inspiring, and I think it's the perfect time for all of us to talk about the power of being friendly to one another. And tonight is a part of our current fall virtual season of adult programming. We have a fantastic lineup of events still to come over the next couple of months. You can check that out by going to mos.org/adults. You can register for all of the events, and while you're there, make sure to sign up for our email list so you can stay up to date on everything happening here at the museum for adults from here on out. And I'll be back a little bit later on for a Q&A with Brian and Vanessa. You can submit questions at any point tonight, starting now, by going to slido.com and entering the code Friendliest. Once again, that's SLIDO.com with the code Friendliest, and I'll be back. We'll try to get through as many of those as we can a little bit later on. And we're going to wrap up the evening with a virtual book signing with Brian and Vanessa. They're going to stick around, so if you haven't already, I urge you to go to one of the two web addresses on your screen, vanessawoods.net or brianhare.net. You can purchase your copy of Survival of the Friendliest. You can note in there who they should sign the book to, and they're going to stick around and sign those and give you all shout-outs live on the stream at the end of the evening. I need to thank our friends at the Lowell Institute for their continued support of the adult programming. Without them, we would not be here tonight, this event would not be happening, and it would not be free. So please join me in giving a huge virtual round of applause and thanks to our friends at the Lowell Institute. And finally, after the talk tonight, I ask you to go to donate.mos.org/MOS at home and consider making a gift to allow us to keep bringing free virtual STEM experiences into your homes. Once again, that's donate.mos.org/MOS at home. But now it is my privilege to introduce to your screens our very special guests tonight, Dr. Brian Hare and Vanessa Woods. Take it away, you two.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you, James. It's so fun for us to be here tonight. In our porch, we wanted to thank the Boston Museum and Lowell Institute, and we wish we could be there with you in person, but given that we can't, welcome to our home. We are out on the porch, so we need to just set a caveats about what goes off here, like fire engines.
Yeah, if you hear any sirens,
Dogs barking,
don't worry, it's fine.
Neighbors yelling at us. We just didn't want to subject you to our office, which is not a good Zoom room.
The only thing that it could be, we have our kids here. One of us may run away.
I've pegged Brian for that. I'm like, Brian, you take care of the children if they interrupt us.
Yeah, if the kids interrupt. But other than that, we're delighted to be able to tell you about our new book and share with you our ideas about survival of the friendliest.
Okay. So we'd like to start by saying the reason why we chose the title Survival of the Friendliest was because there is this misconception about survival of the fittest, that in order to thrive, you should be dominant and aggressive, you need to be the alpha, and this misconception of evolutionary anthropology has really permeated the public consciousness. It's been used as a basis for corporate restructuring, economic policy, the way we teach our kids in school, the way we sort of get ahead, the way we look at nature. And so we thought that survival of the friendliest is really a lot more accurate and a lot more apt as a description of a successful way to survive. Next slide, please, Mark. Oh, and Mark is our slide advancer. We feel very lucky to have a slide advancer. So if we're talking to Mark, he's the one who's controlling everything. So from the man himself, Charles Darwin, or as we like to call him, Chucky D, he said, for those communities, is this Descent of Man?
Yes,
Origin.
it's
This is from
Descent
Descent
of
of
Man.
Man. Everybody knows Origin of the Species, including me, but Descent of Man was when he really laid out some of his foundational evolutionary theory. And so Darwin was also really impressed with the friendliness he found in nature. And when he said survival of the fittest, he was really talking about fitness as your ability to reproduce. And the way it got confused with physical strength and aggression was really a misinterpretation that had nothing to do with Darwin. And so he said that for those communities which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. Because it turns out that in nature, friendliness is an amazing way to survive. Next slide, please, Mark. So just as a couple of examples, flowers and pollinating insects, we understand the partnership between them. So when we say friendliness, we really mean just an attraction to one another and a pro-social interaction. So it's not sort of like friendliness strictly in the human sense. It's any kind of relationship in which one organism acts pro-socially or is cooperative with another. So the symbiotic relationship between flowers and insects is one example. And then I'm not sure if you guys have seen this, but is like literally my favorite video on the internet right now. We have a mongoose and a warthog. Yeah, and then the warthog rolls over, and then the mongoose is literally grooming the warthog and sort of like picking the parasites off him. But it's just amazing the way the warthog kind of like lays down, and then all the other mongooses come. It's amazing and a great example of friendliness. And the last example I wanted to share, which is probably the most important, is this concept of friendliness actually being an attraction towards someone else, and the usual fear that you would have, say, towards a predator being replaced by wanting to be near them and help them in some way. And so what we see here is an eel and the cleanerass, and the cleanerass actually go inside the mouth of the eel and other large fish who are predatory on fish this size, and they go inside the mouth. Their fear is replaced by an attraction, and they clean out all the dental parasites. And there's this super cool work on the blue cleanerass about exactly how much they and their partners know about who is a good cleanerass, who is a good predator. There's like this, agreement that they don't eat each other. And so that's going to be really important for later on. Okay, next slide, please.
So the rest of our talk is really trying to take the bigger picture idea that it's really survival of the friendliest that is the big winning strategy in nature. If you take a step back like Vanessa just did, and you look at life's most successful organisms or sets of organisms, there's almost always a story about an increase in friendliness that allows for a new form of cooperation. And so we want to take the rest of the talk to say that really dogs and our closest relative, the bonobo, both pictured here, are two great examples of very successful and friendly species. And they set up then to think about our own species potentially as winning through friendliness. So let me first tell you the story of how dogs became so successful through friendliness. Next slide, Mark. So based on work I actually started when I was in graduate school at Harvard in Boston, we think that dogs actually evolved through a process of being attracted to humans in a new way. Sort of like the cleanerass became attracted to a predator, and they swim in the mouths of the predator and become so successful and actually cooperate with them in this new and sophisticated way. We think that wolves that were able to approach and be attracted to humans actually were under selection for a type of friendliness that then allowed them to interact and have a new type of cooperative, communicative relationship with us. So in the first stage of dog evolution, the thinking goes, and it's sort of represented by my picture here. I'm sitting in with a bunch of juvenile wolves, and some of them are willing to kind of approach me, and some are pretty hesitant about it. But in the first stage of dog domestication from wolves, it would have been a population or a set of individual wolves that were able to choose humans and actually wanted to interact with humans in a new way to take advantage of all the resources and waste around our increasingly settled places that we were inhabiting. And we know that one of the reasons that we feel confident about this idea is because we know that dogs and wolves began diverging, or that dogs evolved from wolves starting as early as 25,000 years ago. And the best genetic or genomic work suggests it's somewhere between 15 and 25,000 years ago. Well, there was no one that was living with agriculture. That's thousands of years before the first seed had been sown. And so it must be that foragers or hunter-gatherers were the people who were interacting with wolves as dogs began to be domesticated. So we really think it was not that people went out and chose dogs. Instead, it was wolves that chose us. And in that first stage, it was natural selection. And dogs, as they became friendlier, had this new type of cooperative relationship with us. There was also a second stage in dog evolution, and that's the one that we're more familiar with. This is my picture with the tennis balls, the dog with the tennis balls in his mouth. That's my childhood best buddy, Oreo, and he was a purebred Labrador Retriever, and many of us are more familiar with purebred dogs, or at least dogs of European descent or mixed breeds that have genes from European breeds. One of the startling facts, even for me as a dog lover, was when all the genomic work revealed that the European dog breeds are all 150 to 200 years old. There are no dog breeds that would be recognized by most people in the U.S. That are really older than that. So most dogs from that 15 to 25,000 year date would have looked like the dogs in the stage one picture here. These are Hadza hunter-gatherers in Tanzania, and they have dogs with them. And most dogs would have looked more like that as a product of natural selection and the interaction and the cooperative relationship that's sprung from it. It's only the last 150, 200 years that you have dogs, all the crazy different kinds of dogs that have been artificially bred, intentionally selected with humans controlling their reproduction. Before that, we would have been still stuck in stage one with dogs sort of in the version that we see with the Hadza. So let me then tell you that one of the exciting things about this idea of survival of friendliness is every time we see an increase in friendliness, we also see an increase in cooperative communication. That was sort of what was the discovery we made at Harvard when, together with my PhD advisor, Richard Wrangham, and other collaborators, we started to realize that, hey, maybe there's something going on with the communication and cooperation of dogs because of their increase in friendliness. So if you go to the next slide, we can have
what researchers call social inference, a capability humans, like Hare's son Luke, acquire around age 1. To demonstrate the concept, Hare hides a ball under one of these two cups.
Hey, looky guy, where is it? Can you get it? Can you get the ball?
Luke doesn't know which cup the ball is under.
Can you get it?
But when his father points, he makes an inference.
Hey, nice job.
You got it.
So what does that show you?
So when kids his age start understanding pointing, it's right when the foundations of what lead to language and culture start to develop. Hey.
It might look simple, but when Hare tried the same test with bonobos, great apes he studied for more than a decade, look what happened. Bonobos, our closest genetic relatives, can't do it.
You chose the wrong one.
But Hare discovered dogs can.
You ready? All right, I'm gonna hide in one of these two places.
This 2-year-old Labrador named Sisu has no trouble understanding the meaning of pointing.
Now, she doesn't know for sure which place you put it.
That's right. There's no way she could know, and I'm just gonna tell her where it is. Okay, Sisu.
Okay, so one of the big discoveries was that the selection for friendliness that's paired with this new type of cooperation in so many different types of species, it seems that that's happened in dogs as well. They're better able at communicating, using gestures that are critical to becoming fully functioning humans and being able to acquire language and participate in culture. Dogs are using our gestures in a way that we don't even see in our closest relatives like bonobos and chimpanzees, as smart as they are. And truth be told, in most ways, bonobos and chimpanzees could run circles around our dogs in terms of solving problems. But when it comes to that cooperative communicative ability of reading our gestures and understanding what it is that we want, we've been able to show through lots of research that dogs seem to have sort of a special genius. So that seems to be consistent with this idea of selection for friendliness. But really, the big sort of convincing evidence was when my PhD advisor, again at Harvard, said that he wanted me to go to Siberia. And the reason he wanted me to go to Siberia is he wanted me to visit with the Belayev foxes. Dmitry Belayev began breeding a population of foxes in 1959 based on one single criteria, and that was friendliness towards people. He selected foxes that had been fearful of people, and he replaced that fear with a friendliness, an attraction to people. And you can see there's a young girl trying to touch one of the foxes. It's the offspring of many generations of this selection, and that fox is actually attracted to the person and letting her touch them. And actually, having visited the foxes, when you approach, they get really excited. They start whining and crying because they want to be picked up and they want to be held. And that can go badly because sometimes they, if you pick them up, they pee for joy. And that's especially problematic because they have musk scent glands. And so it's a little extra added.
Extra joy.
Yeah, reminder during the day that you had the love of a domesticated fox. But the idea is that there was friendliness selected from 1959 when the experiment began, and it's still ongoing. And they take the friendliest foxes and they breed them together through artificial selection, but it's become a model for what natural selection might do. And the key thing they did is they didn't just select the foxes for being friendly and then measure the impact of what was happening to that population. They also kept a control line that had been selected randomly for how they interacted with humans. So that meant that you could compare the line of foxes that were being experimentally selected for friendliness to the control line that were not selected for friendliness. And so if you look at the little diagram, where we have depicted some of the effects of that selection. And you wouldn't be surprised that compared to the control line, the experimental foxes have behavior changes. The little photo in the corner there is actually my hand. There's a fox nibbling on my hand out of excitement because they're so happy to be near people. And there's changes in their physiology. They have far more serotonin circulating in their brains and in their bodies otherwise. They have lower corticosteroids or the stress hormones. Their development changes. They have a much larger window of development for friendlier behaviors. Their body changes. They have all sorts of things like increases in the frequency of curly tails and the color of their coat, as you see depicted in this white and black spotted domesticated or selected fox. And important for later when we're going to talk about humans, their face and their skull shape changed as well. They have shorter muzzles. They have smaller canine teeth. And finally, when I went to Siberia, what Richard asked me to do was measure their cooperative communicative abilities, just like you saw my son Luke, the bonobo, and Sisu, the 2-year-old Labrador, do. And big surprise for me, I actually did not think this is what we were going to find. But the experimental foxes are just as good as dogs at cooperating and communicating with people, even though they were never selected for their ability to read human gestures. They're much better than the control line, and they're as good as dogs. So it seems that when you select for friendliness, this is really strong evidence that you have this increase in cooperative communication. So dogs really are exhibit A for how you can win big based on selection for friendliness. The foxes really help us experimentally demonstrate the connection between friendliness and cognition. And just to drive home the point of how successful dogs are, just to remind you, sadly, wolves are endangered everywhere they're found in their remaining natural habitat. And there are over 100 million dogs based on very conservative counts worldwide. So they are really the most successful species besides us on the planet. So next slide, Mark, and turn it back to Vanessa.
No, yeah.
Oh, I've got one more. Okay, good. I get to set it up a little bit more. I forgot about this one. Okay, good. And this is just to say that we're how powerful the foxes are as a model, because they experimentally demonstrate the process that when you select for friendliness, you have all these effects that happen as an accidental byproduct of selection for friendliness. So, of course, the Russians weren't selecting, for instance, for cooperative communication, but it accidentally happened. And we think this is a really powerful model for thinking about dog evolution, bonobo evolution, and the evolution of our own species. And all these little figures just represent that we think that each of the changes that I highlighted that occur in the foxes as a result of selection for friendliness, there are the analog or similar changes that happen when you compare wolves to dogs, or chimpanzees to bonobos, or if you compare archaic extinct humans to our own species. So the foxes really have this really powerful effect on showing us what natural selection may do by demonstrating in an experiment what happens when you select for friendliness.
So just as we saw, there was like stage 1 and stage 2 of domestication. So now we're going to talk about my favorite species, which is bonobos. We have 2 closest relatives. Mark, can you advance the slide but then not play the slide? I know that's tricky. Okay, awesome. So these are our closest living relatives, bonobos. Most people are probably most familiar with chimpanzees, but bonobos are really wonderful. And this video we filmed recently will explore more of that. But what I want you to remember is that in the stages of domestication, there is an initial stage that natural selection plays a really important part in selecting against aggression and for friendliness. And then, as Brian just said, all those other fun changes come along for the ride. Okay, so let's watch the video for our intro to bonobos. And all this was filmed at Lola Ya
Chimpanzees and
Bonobo.
bonobos are actually more closely related to us genetically than they are to gorillas. Really, genetically, they're 99% human. That then led me to wonder, are they capable of hate? Or is it that how we can hate one another really special about us? Malu, come here. Bonobos and chimpanzees are fascinating because they are very similar to one another. They have rich social relationships. They have long-term bonds with each other. They eat much of the same stuff. But what makes the 2 species so interesting to study is how they're different. And they're different in ways that are so fundamental to understanding ourselves.
You really can't tell the difference between chimpanzees and bonobos just by looking at them. They look almost the same. I couldn't tell a chimpanzee from a bonobo when I first started. The differences really come when you watch their behavior and see the way their societies are made up.
I think most people are more familiar with chimpanzees. They're male-dominated, and females have to endure a lot of aggression from males.
In chimpanzees, aggression is very much to establish dominance and maintain control. So if an alpha male comes in, the first thing he'll do is he'll kill all the babies.
Bonobos have none of that.
They are female-dominated, and infants and babies are almost never harmed.
Okay, so wonderful. Bonobos are just my favorite ever. And so what I want to talk to you about now is the concept of friendliness and how it might apply in a species that we were calling self-domesticated, like the bonobos. So I want to explain the dictator game. It is when, say, you have like $100 and there's someone in the next room that you've never met before, a total stranger, and then there's like a group mate, and then you can decide how much of this $100 you're going to share. And what they found in many economic studies is that you usually share, if there's no stranger, you'll just share half, but that as people, we are more likely to share with someone in our group than we are with a complete stranger. And this is, you know, there was this sort of like excitement about human altruism just because we give half to a group mate if they were on the other side, because why would you give anything at all? So this was held up as this idea of human uniqueness. We're so altruistic. It's like the basis for donating charity and giving blood. But what we found is that when we did this experiment with bonobos, and we'll show you what it looks like in a minute, but they actually, okay, next slide, they actually gave more of their food to a stranger than they did to a group mate when they had a choice. So let's play the video so you can just see what that looks like. That's what I'm saying. This is starting to happen firstly. That there's, or on the other side, and that's just because they have there's a door on the other side that has, you know, another individual, and you just saw how easy it was for them to open the door, so they can just choose who to let in, and they actually prefer strangers. They are incredibly pro-social towards them. So that was like an amazing finding to us. That, you know, I didn't expect that. I thought that they would let in their group mate because that's what people do. So in researching and writing the book, one of the really big surprises for me was that, you know, we have not been alone for that long. And is that your slide?
Yeah.
Sorry. I was really excited. I thought the Neanderthals were my slide.
No.
Okay, fine. Sorry.
No.
It was like hitting me under the table. I'm like, what are you doing? Okay, fine. It was your slide.
Anyway, you can tell that it was fun to write a book together.
We did this interview with Alan Alda, and he's like, what's it like to write a book when you're married? Anyway, you should listen to the interview.
Anyway, so the bonobos, I think what they do is they sort of nicely show us how a species that is wild and actually is an ape and is our closest living relative actually may have also been selected for friendliness. And in that slide where I had those figures, the little squares, each with the 6 little panels trying to say, look, there's all the same stuff that happened to the foxes happen in dogs, bonobos, and humans. The selection for friendliness, we think, resulted in the sharing you saw in that video where they actually help a stranger. That's one of the measures. We also looked at their morphology, or their bodies, and found evidence for selection against friendliness there. We looked at their hormones, and we looked at their physiology. We looked at all the same, their development. We looked at everything. And all the analogous changes that you see in the foxes happen in the bonobos. And so it's this really amazing example where a species that is our closest living relative seems to fit the self-domestication or selection for friendliness model. So then we get to our own species, and the question becomes, well, what does this have to do with us? And as Vanessa was beginning to tell you, one of the really exciting things in anthropology over the last 10 years is, I think people think of it as kind of a static field. Oh yeah, we've known that, you know, what do they learn new? Well, my gosh, the new thing, the big thing in the last 10 years is that we were not alone on this planet till the last 25, 50,000 years. There may have been other humans even 25,000 years ago, definitely 50,000 years ago. And at 100,000 years ago, it was a pretty crowded planet with as many as 4, some people have argued 7 different species of humans. And here's the key point. If I were to ask any of you, point blank, tell me, what is it that's special or different about humans? I think most people would say one of the following. They would say, well, we have big brains, or we are linguistic, we have language, or we have culture, these rich cultures that allow us to do so many things. Well, all of these species, there's evidence that they had those same things. And yet, if you advance, they went extinct. So if big brains and language and culture predict anything about a species, it's that they're going to die and go extinct, not that they're going to become super successful. And why our species was the only human left standing, I think, and Vanessa and I have argued in the book, is we were the friendliest species of human to evolve. So if you advance to the next slide, I can tell you what kind of friendliness we think it is. And this is the friendliness that we think evolved that gave our species an advantage over other humans, and why they went extinct and we didn't. We have a big brain, we are linguistic, cultural, and they are too. But it's our ability to form friendships, not just based on familiarity. So the bonobos that are attracted to strangers, they're recognizing a stranger based on whether they're familiar with that individual or not. Chimpanzees are terrified of strangers. They're terrified based on if they're familiar with that individual or not. Did I grow up with you? Have I seen you every day of my life? Or, is my mom friend with you and I've seen you a lot when I was a baby and now I recognize you? We also do that, but we do something new and different. And we've argued that it's only our human species, not the other humans, that have markers of group identity. So that is depicted here. This is the Cameron Crazies at Duke University. It could be at any sporting event, though. Not right now. Not right now. Not right now, right. But it could be at any sporting event normally in normal times where what does this picture represent? It's a whole bunch of strangers who are from all over the country and all over the world, actually. They didn't know each other literally weeks before. And now they've become fast friends around this idea, this group identity of being a Duke Cameron crazy. And now they even are going to paint themselves and they're going to go crazy and holler and yell and do everything they can for their group identity and their group to win. So that seems to be a really special thing about our species. What it does is, instead of it being that we only have a few friends for our lives and we're stuck being friends with those we're familiar with, all of a sudden, if I can recognize a stranger I've never seen before, but they share my identity, an interest in science. Maybe they like the Red Sox. Maybe they like to complain about traffic. Who knows what it is? It could be anything, but if there's something that we share in common that could be used as a marker of identity, religion, race, ethnicity, a way we speak, some way we decorate ourselves, that can become a marker of group identity. And now strangers that I normally could not form friendships with, I can. I can quickly expand my group well beyond what any other species has been capable of before. All right, so next slide. And so why does it matter? Well, this can pay huge dividends. So this new type of friendliness where we can recognize a complete stranger as belonging to our group, even though we are not familiar with them, it takes us out of this situation, which is if each of these faces represent different groups of people, well, most other human species and actually most primates, this is how group interactions would work. There'd be a little bit of exchange of social interactions and maybe individuals between groups, a little bit of exchange of individuals immigrating between the groups. But most groups are not interacting and there's very little information exchange. As soon as you can have group identity and as soon as you can recognize strangers that have your group identity as being like you and someone you can be friends with, if you can advance the slide, the exchange of information becomes this, which is that we all, even though I'm not familiar with you, I know you have a marker of group identity. I can recognize that we decorate ourselves the same way, so I can start interacting with you and potentially build a trusting relationship based on group identity. So that's what then expands the world of innovators that our species could interact with. So if you're only meeting 10 or 15 people your whole life, you're only exposed to the ideas of those 10, 15 people and their ancestors, assuming they could bring forward and learn from their ancestors. But if you have hundreds of people now you're interacting with in your life, maybe even thousands of people, now you have a network of minds that the world had never seen before. Our cultural ratcheting, or our ability to learn from each other and share ideas within generation and between, it just went to a whole new plane, exploded, and we outcompeted easily the other species of humans. We actually became super predators and ultra social. So as soon as we have this ability to recognize our strangers as group members, it changes the whole calculus, and our species and its new type of friendliness wins the day. So you can go to the next slide. And we tested this because that's an interesting idea. And but how are you going to actually test for friendliness in human evolution? That doesn't seem possible. Well, remember, there's this interesting connection between selection for friendliness in the foxes and changes in their body and in their skulls and in their faces. So because of that connection, we can ask the question, and we see that connection in dogs and bonobos too. We can ask, hey, what about in the fossil record? Can we go find evidence for what we'd expect if there was selection for friendliness in our own lineage? And on, you can see here, there's an archaic human and a modern human skull, an archaic reconstruction of a face of an archaic human and a modern human. And these are individuals who are all human Homo sapiens. These are not humans of another species. And the prediction was that if archaic humans were under selection for friendliness, they would have some changes in their faces that would indicate they were becoming friendlier. And so do we have friendlier faces? Well, the thinking is the brow ridges that you see in that archaic human, they disappear over generations and thousands of years, starting around 100,000 years ago. And also our faces become shorter, just like the foxes. Faces become shorter when you have selection for friendliness, and our faces actually change in terms of their width. So there's lots of things that we've been able to go into the fossil record and ask questions about, are some of those changes occurring that we think are the same. One of the things that is still yet to be hammered down, and we're not sure, but it's a prediction, and I think it's your favorite, probably.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite one.
One of the predictions that falls out from this is there should be pigment change. There should be some coloration or something that changes in our species as we become selected for friendliness. And we've argued that what it is if you can advance, it's actually the colors of our eye sclera, the whites of our eyes. So I think, and we've argued, that only our species, after we had selection for friendliness, had white sclera. It ends up that only humans of all primates have white eyes. The eyes that we put over this archaic human face are actually the eyes of chimpanzees. And so what we think is that if you had interacted with a Homo sapien 100, 150,000 years ago, or a Neanderthal, or a Denisovan, or any of the other archaic humans, you would have been interacting with somebody who had eyes more like a chimpanzee. It's only humans that have these white sclera, and there's really nice evidence that white sclera evolved to encourage cooperation and communication that could only happen when there was an increase in friendliness. So we think our eyes are actually the evidence for a friendlier species, and the fact that we have such friendly faces.
And when everyone goes evil in, like, you know, Gremlins or like horror movies, the first thing to go is the white eyeballs. Always, always. Just keep that in mind next time you see something. Next slide.
Yeah, next slide.
Okay, so how does this make sense? We're like, we're the friendliest species. Oh, we can culturally network with billions of people. Like, how does that make sense with the world around us today? So we actually think that what we call it the mama bear hypothesis, because when is a polar bear here the most adorable and the most loving and the most kind? It's when she's with her cubs. So we argue that one of the changes in our species, that we were suddenly able to treat complete strangers who we identify as being one of us as family members. We love them, we protect them, we're set up to cooperate with them, exchange information, we welcome them into our homes, feed them, and just generally, you know, be the awesome humans we can be. But the flip side of that is like, when is a mother bear also the most dangerous? Okay, next slide. It's when she's with her cubs. I can't believe we chose that picture. But yes, she's the most dangerous when she is protecting her cubs. So, you know, we often hear human kindness and human cruelty talked about as though they're two separate things, but we actually think they're the opposite sides of the same coin. We can be so cruel because we are so kind to those who we enfold in this concept of group identity that we have. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is a challenge for me. I always have to remember everything. Brian might have to help me. Okay, so this diagram here is another super famous but incorrect idea from evolutionary anthropology. It's called the ascent of man, and you know, everybody seen it, everybody is familiar with it, and it shows, you know, kind of like an australopithecine or an ape sort of slowly standing up and becoming the modern human. And this is incorrect because, as we've seen before, like there were lots of different humans, there was gene flow between them, and sort of this nice convenient line was more kind of like a messy, tangled bush. And, you know, we're still trying to make sense of it, but evolution definitely does not look like this. But it's a really common misconception that this is what it looks like. So when people were asked, when Americans were, this has been done over and over with different cultural groups, but when people are asked, how human or how evolved do you think that this other group of people is? And here we've got Arabs and Russians and Muslims and Australians, Americans and Swedes. So obviously this is a trick question, because the answer is, next slide, that everybody's human and everybody is fully human. There's no one who's less than humans. But say if you ask Americans what they think of these other groups, you might see something like this. Next slide. And if you ask a different group of people what they think of these other groups listed here, you might see something like this. So we call this, and you know, other researchers also call this dehumanization. It's something very specific. It's when you see another group as less than human. And we think this comes of this, you know, almost superhumanizing force of group identity, where we feel like, you know, those we identify with are part of our family, and that those who threaten them are less than human. And we think this is a common feature of humans everywhere. We think that everybody does it to some extent. Next slide. And as evidence, we have, we put this map together that shows democide and genocide for 200 years, from 1818 to 2018. And democide is the politically sanctioned genocide of a culture or an ethnicity. And as we see, I mean, it's got most of the world covered. I think the last time we did this, someone was like, Canada. But I mean, if you move it back, I think like 20 years, there was a genocide of some Native Americans. And so, you know, Canada is not immune either. And so if we expanded this even 100 years previous, then, I mean, pretty much the entire map, except for Antarctica, would be covered. So this is, I mean, the dehumanizing and the violence that follows towards another group of people is not something that's characteristic of one place or one culture. We see it everywhere, all over the world, as this sort of very small slice of history shows us. Next slide.
Okay, so to recap, we've been arguing that humans are the friendliest human species to have evolved, but we have this mama bear psychology, where yes, we're kind and we're friendly towards strangers that we see as sharing our group identity, but because we start to love them as if they were family, even though they're completely strangers and they're not related to us, they're part of our group. And when they're threatened, we feel threatened. And so we become like a mama bear. and we can actually become more violent, more aggressive in trying to protect our group members and even the identity that we might feel that is threatened. There's physiological work that suggests that this may be going on. There's also experimental work that suggests that this is going on. And in fact, the mechanism that we think may be happening in the brain is the exact same centers in the brain that allow for our unique human abilities to think about what it is like to be someone else, become shut down, turn off when we feel our group or our group identity is threatened. And then that can lead, in the worst case, to dehumanization. And the figure that Vanessa was showing you with those little balls moving back and forth, depending on how people were ranking groups, it's been done in all sorts of different cultures, and everywhere we've looked, we've found evidence for dehumanization. It's not what you think. It's not necessarily that it's one group dehumanizes or is more likely to dehumanize. That's the group that is full of dehumanizers. All groups of people have people who are willing to dehumanize when they feel their group identity is threatened. And so that then leads to the worst case, and you can have democide and genocide. So, okay, well, there's this paradox of our kindness and our terrible cruelty. How do we do better? How can we solve a problem and have a friendlier future? And in the book, what we talk about is how we don't think that's going to happen first. First of all, we don't think that we're going to be breeding nicer people. We don't think...
We literally just got an email about that yesterday.
Yeah, we often get asked. It's a reasonable question. I mean, I just told you that, you know,
breed the foxes.
Selecting foxes leads to friendlier foxes, and that's the story of human evolution. But we don't think that's going to be a good solution. And not only is it morally repugnant, but it actually wouldn't work. And we detail why in the book. And then the other thing we rule out is technology. I think we all have seen how technology is a double-edged sword. Technology can be used for kindness or cruelty. It just depends on who's wielding it. So really what we think is that social problems require social solutions. And so we want to highlight a few of those for you. And the first is so beautifully illustrated by Mr. Rogers here. And this was a shot when he was trying to confront the problem of, during the civil rights movement, of people feeling uncomfortable and doing really violent things against African Americans or blacks in the United States. And so he, on his show, sat together with one of his co-stars.
It was the swimming pools. It's when they didn't want to swim together. You didn't say swimming pools.
Oh, sorry, I didn't say swimming pools. They didn't want to swim in the swimming pools, and there was specifically there was violence against people in swimming pools where you know, horrible things were done to people. So he was trying to, by example, show that his friend, who everybody was familiar with on the show, that of course he would go swimming together with his friend. And so one of the most powerful bridges between groups that feel that their group is threatened by the identity of the other, is cross-group friendships. It's been shown over and over in research that when you have contact between individuals of different groups, and if they're able to form true friendships, real friends, that those friendships actually immunize large parts of groups against the worst of human nature. It really, if there's a friend in one group, if they're friends between two groups, and that friendship then can prevent one of those groups from seeing the other group as not fully human. So it really is that cross-group friendships and contact, having, especially the earlier in life, the better. You know, the more likely it is that people are going to humanize other groups and actually find ways to recognize that, oh, we do share part of our group identity, and I'm not threatened by the thing that is a little bit unfamiliar to you. So that's number one, and we actually think is the most powerful solution is cross-group friendships, because there's experimental evidence, there's observational evidence, there's historical records of how cross-group friendships really powerfully diffuse dehumanization and really bring forth the friendliness that is the secret of our species' success. So number two, if you can advance, Mark, believe it or not, is democracy. we make the case in the book that humans did not evolve as despots, and if you read the book, you'll see we make the case that hunter-gatherers or foraging populations were highly egalitarian. There were no chiefs or leaders, and it was with agriculture that you have the advent of chiefs and leaders. But even with that, there's a wonderful new book by David Stasavage, a historian, a political historian, and he's made the case that actually democracy was quite, forms of democratic government were quite frequent in human history across the world. So I don't think that we evolved as despots where we're destined to have a leader or some kind of monarch or emperor in charge, but instead modern democracies have to deal with the fact that we have this egalitarian spirit, but when you have large populations of people, there have to be ways for one group to lead and the other to potentially be in the minority. But when groups are not in power, they still have a voice and they still can influence the direction that whatever political unit it is moves. So we do think that democracy and fortifying those democratic institutions is critical. And of course, thinking about contact and how we can have cross-group friendships help immunize us against the worst is an important exercise. So we have ideas there, very specific, concrete ideas in the book about what to do. All right, and then the final thing is actually our relationship with nature. One of the most exciting things as we were doing the research, I think, on the book was to realize there's a really nice evidence that how people perceive the natural world really influences how they perceive other humans. So in one case, you have this form, which is a more hierarchical view, and people, individuals or groups of people who have this more hierarchical view of nature tend to also view human groups more hierarchically. And people who have a really strong belief that there are inferior or superior groups of humans are more susceptible to dehumanization and are more likely to be accepting of violence or aggression towards other groups. But if you, Mark, advance to the last example here, people who have a view where humans are just another species of organisms that are on Earth, that we share the planet with, or that there aren't these group hierarchies that are as strict, that there aren't inferior or superior species, or there aren't inferior or superior human groups, these people are much more likely to humanize groups that are unfamiliar or who have different group identities. So I think also understanding more how we interact with the natural world, and especially even our dogs, because some of our own work at Duke, we've found that this actually translates into how we interact with our dogs, think about our dogs, where people who view dogs through a more hierarchical lens, that breeds of dogs are sort of either superior or inferior, they tend to be more the people who view the natural world, or even groups of people that way. People who are sort of more egalitarian in their view of dogs have more this view of the natural world and groups of humans as more equal. So I think those are three things. One is contact, two is fortifying our democratic institutions, and three is continuing to think more about our place in the natural world and what that how that reflects on how we think about ourselves and others of our species, and extending our care for all humans and our view of who belongs. So if we go to the last slide, I think we can thank them for their attention.
That's right.
And,
give us your question.
And
we're gonna bring back the James.
We're gonna bring back James, and we're gonna be ready for questions.
Hello, thank you both so much.
Thank you, James.
Yes,
thank you.
Speaking of two people that I feel very lucky to call friends, thank you both for being here. I wish you could be here in person, but one day. But we really appreciate your time. We're such fans of both of yours and your work, and congratulations on the book. We're thrilled that we could be a part of it. We're going to jump into Q&A right now because we have questions coming in. This is just a reminder, if you haven't submitted your questions yet out there watching, you can do so by going to slido.com, SLIDO.com, and enter the code Friendliest, and we'll try and get through a bunch of those tonight. This is also a reminder that you should be going to either brianhare.net or vanessawoods.net and order a copy of Survival of the Friendliest. You can, note who they should sign it to. Stick around following this for the virtual signing. It's a fascinating and an important read. So we're going to jump right in, if that's okay, Brian and Vanessa, with the first question. Does your research indicate if there are ways for humans to improve their cooperative communication individually?
Good one.
Cooperative and communicative. And
Theory of mind in kids?
Well, I mean, we tend to, I have spent a lot of time looking at individual differences in dogs and not as much in people. I wouldn't be the expert there, but I could say some general things, which is that the overall pattern when we've studied animals is that tolerance and friendliness are far more important for cooperation and communication than knowledge. It doesn't matter how knowledgeable you are if two individuals, or if you are unable to be tolerant of someone and whatever it is that it might be annoying you about them, that it's going to be very difficult for you to cooperate and communicate. So I would say anything you can do to increase your tolerance, that's going to facilitate.
Those are perfect words, I think, to live by. So next question. Do you believe that there will be continued evolutionary pressure on humans to be friendlier in the future?
Oh, you take that fun one. You take that. You're the science writer. You go with that one.
I mean, yes, just flat out yes. Well, it's really funny because when we were writing the book, we'd actually finished it back in 2016. We were getting ready to turn it in, and we just kind of had this warning at the end because, Obama was president, Hillary was going to be the next president, and we ended it with, I know things look good and we're making progress, but be warned, like our dehumanizing side could always come out. We need to be aware. And then 2016 happened and we were like, well, I mean, duh. So now we just kind of like threw out half the book. I mean, it took us 7 years to write this. And we threw it out, and then we're like, okay, so what are the solutions then? So obviously we can all dehumanize each other, and we're seeing this across a large range of people. How do we fix this? And so I think the answer is yes, we will become friendlier, with the caveat, as long as we understand human nature and the fact that our ability to be kind and our ability to be cruel are really two parts of the same, the same willingness to envelope these in-group strangers as our own. And one interesting thing that I did find during our research was that educating tolerance, as in, emphasizing multicultural differences or emphasizing the differences between groups and, sort of saying to honor these groups, really kind of lecturing people about being tolerant is really just going to entrench that intolerant ideology even further. And the one thing we found that works is really these cross-group friendships. So I think if everyone can keep that in mind, that we need to keep building bridges and being tolerant of one another and forming these friendships, I think that is going to do more good than kind of lecturing people about the importance of, of being tolerant.
Wonderful. You're both so inspiring. You talk about all this in just a really accessible way, and it's just really great to see it tied to sort of the world around us currently. So we're really just thrilled to have this conversation happening tonight. Jumping off of that question and that answer, if another group is dehumanizing someone or another group, is there anything that the victim group can do to rehumanize themselves?
Well, you want me to take that, or you want to take it?
Definitely.
Okay. So one of the things we didn't talk about is the number one predictor of whether a group dehumanizes another group is if they think their group is being dehumanized by the other group. So it's meta, and it actually is called meta dehumanization or reciprocal dehumanization. So if you wanted to, if you were evil and you wanted to create dehumanization, what you would do is you would tell the other group that you're being dehumanized by the other group. And that then would then stir the flames of violence and aggression. It doesn't have to be that the actual group is dehumanizing. You just tell them that. And that then stirs the pot. So the flip side of that then is, and this is the good news, it's actually a very, it's a scary but happy story, because just like the switch can get flipped to have dehumanization occur, if you're threatened and you feel your group is being dehumanized, by humanizing another group and by showing examples where they're cross-group friendships, instantly you get a response where dehumanization levels plummet rapidly. So I do think that there are reasons to be optimistic about our nature when you see the results.
And then can I add to that? Can I add to that, James?
Yes, of course.
So one concrete example of that was there was a civil rights activist actually here in Durham and Atwater, and C.P. Ellis, and he was a grand dragon cyclops. He was the grand cyclops of the KKK, and at that time they were fighting to keep segregation, and there were people on both sides who wanted Durham to stay segregated because the black students who went to school, they had to bus like really long hours. It was disadvantageous for them, and you know, it was like there were people on both sides who thought being kept separate was a good thing, but actually the only way for people to see each other as human, for this uber humanization, is for people to be in contact, in friendly contacts all the time. And so that's why in the book we say that education is really important, not sort of the education of tolerance, but education like our schools. Like our schools need to be diverse. There needs to be a diverse range of people from economic status, from economic and socioeconomic statuses, and they all need to be together. These kids have to be friends, and those friendships have to be nurtured and enabled as they go through school. Another example is just the way we build our cities. Are we building these gated, isolated communities, or are we building sidewalks? Do we have parks? Do we have common spaces? And so that's, I think, some concrete examples of how, you know, groups will end up humanizing each other.
Wonderful. And so this next question, the theory of whitening of human eyes through human evolution is really interesting. Was there anything that prompted you to develop this theory?
Yeah, great question. Sorry, and I probably went too fast there. So what prompted it was there was work with a range of primate species that showed, oh, our friendly dog is here. I have to show you. He's walking in. He's trying to, yeah. He wants food. He's like, I'm hungry. It's dinner. There it is.
We even feed you?
Welcome.
So, yeah. Hi, Congo. Sorry. Anyway, we had to say hi to Congo. So there was a study of a range of primate species, and only humans have white sclera, and all the other species pay a metabolic cost to hide their eyes. And the thinking is you hide your eyes because you don't want anyone to see where you're looking or to predict what you're going to do next, because you're competing against them. The only reason that you would advertise your eyes is you want people to know you're looking at them, and you want them to know what you're going to do next. I.e., you're trying to facilitate cooperative communication. The story is much longer than that, but let me just, because everybody loves dogs, let me tell you the dog part of that story. It ends up that this thinking that white sclera may be important for human cooperative communication and a signal of selection for friendliness, one of my colleagues went and measured the whites of dog eyes and compared wolves. And it ends up that there is a muscle in the eyes of dogs that have evolved to be exaggerated. And those are the muscles that actually pull back the eye so that we can see more whites of their eyes when they do that guilty eye look.
Yes.
And that muscle does not really exist in wolves. And so it is that dogs are using that eye contact to sort of hijack that same friendly cue that we have evolved to recognize each other.
Wow. Well, I know Congo's hungry, but
Oh no!
no,
fed him
and
three times today.
it feels like this actually a great last question. I know you had just said you were working on the book for what, 7 years it took to write this?
Felt longer.
Was there anything that you encountered while you were doing your research or putting the book together that surprised both of you about this research and this work and our evolution?
So many things. I think for me, it was that that friendships over the decades and decades of research of how to bring people from different groups together, that friendships was just the most powerful tool that we have. Because I would have been like, oh, it's definitely education. You got to educate people about these issues, and then just once that connection. I mean, it seems obvious when you think about it, but just once that connection was made, to see the world through that lens in terms of, well, how do we then, send our kids to school, and how do we build our cities, and how do we have a democracy that ensures that people from both sides can be friends, and how is that process ruptured, and then what do we see as a result? What about you? Are you surprising?
James, do we still have time for me to have a surprise?
Please, yes, have a surprise.
Oh, okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't need to wrap up. Okay. So I, just following on that, I agree with Vanessa. One of the most beautiful examples of that was that little bouquet of flowers that was with E Pluribus Unum. That was a cartoon from 260 years ago. There was a men's magazine that actually E Pluribus Unum was taken from, and the argument in the magazine apparently was that out of many one, it's like a bouquet where all the different flowers, they all look different. They all have their own properties and shapes, but you put them together and they make something more than the sum of the parts. And so that's really different than the sort of melting pot idea where, everybody has to come together and assimilate. Instead, there's this bouquet, and I think that was sort of a beautiful imagery of, I guess, what we're saying on the friendship side. The other thing that was kind of a struggle intellectually, and also just to understand the literature, was how is dehumanization different than prejudice? And they are separate things. They're thought to be totally different. And prejudice is just a disliking of a group or of an identity or some type of person. Whereas dehumanization is truly where you blatantly view another group as less than fully human. And it ends up that all the experiments that have been done now, it really is that prejudice doesn't explain the worst behaviors and actions that people take. Violence and aggression and torture, when you measure prejudice, it doesn't predict those things. It's actually people's tendency to dehumanize that can predict the worst in human nature. So on that, it might surprise people that really it's only in the last, 10 years that social psychologists have begun seriously studying dehumanization.
Well, thank you for sharing both of those. I'm sure there were plenty more that we can share next time, the next event. But speaking of surprises, before we head over to the book signing, we turn the reins over to you to sign some books. I believe that you have an extra bonus video for us, correct? About everyone's favorite, well, my favorite furry friends. Is that right?
Yes.
For the dog lovers.
For the dog lovers. And also, I learned this from Isabella Rossellini that, you want everybody to leave happy. So we have another video of how our friendly friends, the dog, are genius.
Dogs actually have a genius. They have a special genius to understand humans, to cooperate and communicate with us in a way that really no other species can. If you look at dogs and their success as a species, it's kind of a remarkable story. We know dogs began being domesticated 14 to 25,000 years ago. They evolved from wolves. And sadly, wolves are endangered everywhere they're found, and dogs are found everywhere where you find humans, and they are anything but endangered. And it's all about forming a relationship with us. When we make eye contact with them and when we're physically interacting with them, it is causing a neurophysiological response that is the exact mirror of what happens as parents bond with their newborn infant. It leads to bonding and social concern. Well, dogs actually seem to have hijacked that mechanism in us. So they really have converged and become more like humans than their wolf relatives. Once we realized that dogs had this genius to cooperate and communicate, I think often we're really worried about some kind of hierarchy of, are dogs smarter than other species, or is my dog smarter than other breeds, whatever. That's just not the case when you actually study dog psychology. Dogs have different types of intelligence. Each of these types of intelligence, they vary independently from one another. So that means if you're a really great communicator as a dog, it doesn't mean that you have amazing working memory that you rely on. If you're a dog that really is incredibly skilled at using inferential reasoning to solve problems, it doesn't mean that you're a dog that necessarily has a lot of empathy relative to other dogs. So these things vary independently, and that's then what is those are the ingredients for all the different recipes of personality that then we get to enjoy for all those individual dogs we each fall in love with. Some of the things dogs are doing today that even 10 years ago they wouldn't be doing is their dogs trained as cadaver dogs to find people who have died, people who are missing. There are dogs that are being used to sniff out a variety of cancers. There are dogs that are helping children with autism. Anything that involves social bonding, the need for companionship and non-judgmental love, dogs are your ticket. So I enjoy really studying dogs because not only do they help me understand humans better, and obviously find ways to enrich my own relationship. But I think it's a really powerful way to study and even talk about evolution is through the eyes of dogs.
I love that video. I think that's the perfect way to wrap up the formal program. Vanessa, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to be here tonight. It actually is the kickoff for our fall season, so there's no better way to have started things off. So thank you so much. Everyone out there, this is, again, a final reminder from me to go to either brianhare.net or vanessawoods.net and purchase your copy of Survival of the Friendliest for the book signing, which we're about to transition to. I need to once more thank our funders, the Lowell Institute, for their continued support of our programming, and thank all of you for joining us and spending your Tuesday night with us. We hope you'll check out the rest of our season, keep coming back and hanging out with us. Now, Brian and Vanessa, I think as we dive into the book signing, there's a special guest that has a few words to kick us off, right?
Yes, our very good friend Amy Tan did this video for us that we'd like to share with everybody.
Today's personal book club recommendation, Survival of the Friendliest. It's a look at our origins as well as our humanity, and necessarily looks at dehumanization, the capacity of the human psyche for cruelty. But there's also something in there about how we can recapture compassion and cooperation. And now for a look at 3 of the friendliest. We have our rescue, Felix, who just joined our household, and Tux, and Bobo.
I love Amy and her dogs. Okay, so this is new for us. We've never done this before, so bear with us. But we have our first one is to Amanda. Oh, it is Amanda's birthday! Happy birthday, Amanda!
Happy birthday, Amanda.
Yeah, so on the website there should be a PayPal function, and then we should get the notice, and then we're going to sign the book for you here, and then pop it in the mail, and you should have it in a day or two. So we're sorry we can't do this in person and just hand you the book, but this is technology at its finest. All right, so happy birthday to Amanda. Thank you for spending your birthday with us, Amanda. It's very exciting. Perfect.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Okay.
You want to show her it signed? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, pageantry.
Look at this.
You
Can you see it?
And then
All right.
it'll be with you tomorrow or the next day. Isn't that magical? I'd have to say this is all James' idea. He's the brains behind this operation. All right. Now, the next one is it's from Jessica. And it's to Jess. Hang on, I have to show Brian because sometimes.
You want to do it?
Huh? Oh, no, you can do it, but Jess. Jess and Grace, the pup.
Oh.
So sweet. I hope Grace has enjoyed the show. Oh, Congo left us, apparently. Went to find some more food. Good job, Lisbeth. Okay, let me just check. I've got Jess and her address. Yes. So we can send that off tomorrow. Okay.
All right, Jess, I gotcha. There it is. I'll show you.
All right. Okay, and we have Nora here. Nora, N-O-R-A. Oh, this is fun. All right, just say to Nora, to flipping scientific myths.
Where's Nora?
Nora, N-O-R-A.
Got it. Like you would think.
Yeah.
And then it says, Dear Nora, to
flipping scientific myths, which I like.
All right.
Awesome. Okay, so I think
Sign that.
Oh yeah, I do have to sign that one. So that is all that has come through on the email. We will continue. We can continue to do this if your email hasn't come through, and we will send them off tomorrow. Oh, I think we have to say goodnight, everybody.
Yeah, well, we're going to say goodnight to everybody, but why don't you give it a few more minutes?
Okay.
Because it's a book signing. There might be more people you don't know. Try your phone. See if it refreshes. Yeah, we're just waiting to see if there's anybody else, and then we can wrap up.
Thank you.
And I think we can wrap up here and just say thank you for those who stayed after, and we're excited to send you your book, and we'll make sure they get to you as quick as possible. And thank you to James and the whole team in Boston for making tonight possible. It was so fun to come visit Boston, even though we were here.
Hopefully we can see you next time in person.